Hello and welcome to another Battle Games in Middle-earth painting tutorial. This one is a Patreon request. Sadly not painting the gorgeous new plastic, but an old metal Saruman I've had kicking around for a while. This is a pretty basic way of painting him though. I've done a few versions before and kind of actually prefer painting over black, but this tabletop standard version starts with an undercoat of white and then a wash with Gryphonne Sepia. While that layer is still drying, I went back to the hair, face and the rest of the skin with black, just to give it a decent colour on which to leave those dark details in the recesses. I also did the staff at this stage, but to be honest, it's not really worth doing it now. There's absolutely no chance of not hitting it when you're painting the cloak white later. With Gorthor Brown, I go back over that skin and hair to give it a proper coat before we go onto the skin. For some reason, I've decided to do no washes on this skin, just because because I wanted a different style for the skin this time. I usually go with a sort of skin tone and then wash it and then re-highlight it, but this time I'm going to build up from the dark layer with the highlights. With Bleached bone, I start the laborious process of painting the cloak. At this point, it's pretty much a layer to cover up most of the wash, leaving it only in the deep recesses. But the more thorough you are here, the better. Try not to leave any wash showing except in those bits in the recesses. Isengard yourself against going back over and over again for missed bits of white. Apologies about that. So I add to the bleached bone with a bit of white to make a bit of a mix, about a 50-50 mix of bleached bone and white, but maybe not even that much. It's not an exact recipe, and to be honest, it doesn't matter if it is, because we're working up to that crisp white coat eventually anyway. This is just an intermediary step. So get to work, water it down a bit, but mainly just crack on with highlighting the very highest edges of the cloak first, before working down to what you feel is a natural end to this kind of lightest part of the cloak. Probably somewhere around halfway down each fold. And then when you get to that halfway down point, water it down a bit more for the deeper parts. That means when it's dry, more of the darker layers show through to blend it all together. It's a pretty good move. Or thank me for that tip later. Now I'm just mixing more white into that bony white mix, but at this stage it is pretty much 90% white, having used a lot of it already. But Saruman, did I not feel like washing my palette out before doing it. I think that's all the puns I've got, don't worry. Using that mostly white mix, I go back over the cloth again, just touching it up, consensually of course, especially on the very edges of the folds. What's hard about Saruman is that his cloak is entirely white, and I've tried painting it with greys and cream type whites before, but the greys just don't really look very movie authentic, so this does feel like the most effective way of doing it really. Plus it's a lot easier than overcomplicating things with lots of different shades of white. Also, make sure you don't miss the undergarments. They're also a slight off-white too, disconcertingly. You'd have thought white was in his name or something. Pure white, watered down a tad, is used for the main edge highlight and just to tidy up any bits that look a little too dark. To tidy those bits up without ruining the blend, I kind of dry brush the white over it so it takes the edge off without going too white and also going back over things in the creamier previous colours. But we will inevitably go back to this in a bit, don't worry. Next is Tallarn Flesh. As usual, the paints are listed in the description below, along with their current GW conversions. Using that, I carefully paint the face and hands. As I mentioned, no washes going on after this, so it's precision painting. I paint one thick horizontal line on the forehead, leaving brown as sort of a frame around the face, and then I paint down the nose, and on either side I dot the cheeks in. It may need to be filled in more than that, but that's the general idea anyway. And usually it's pretty darn effective. Doing the same with the hands, I just paint the fingers individually and the hands themselves too, leaving brown in the recesses. Now, I mentioned not wanting too much grey in the cloak. Well, I do want some grey in his beard, so I highlight that brown with Codex Grey or Dawnstone. This is a thick highlight over the top of that brown, so you do get some earthy tones underneath, kind of hinting at that oneness with nature that Saruman has covered up with the grey and metal and machines. Also, don't forget those impressive eyebrows. They're well worth highlighting there. The highlight of that hair is basically Codex Grey mixed with the cloak highlights from earlier, so it's not really a white highlight, but a slightly tinged creamy highlight with white, bone and grey all mixed together. That is again just dry brushed on with a detailed brush. Back to the facial detailing now. To add to that pallid, almost white skin tone that Saruman has, it's funny that, considering his name, I use Elf Flesh, but use more than I might normally use. I paint 3 lines across his forehead to imply wrinkles, so you're leaving the sort of darker flesh tones underneath that, and then sharpen that slightly wizened nose, as well as dotting the cheeks, just subtly. With Tallarn Flesh, I go back just to detail those wrinkles in a bit better and define them. Now I paint the orb with, yes, you've guessed it, pure white. Pretty simple, but just to be careful to make it look smooth by making sure it's slightly watered down. Maybe even go for 2 thin layers. While you're using that white, go back to the eyes and paint those in white, and I also add some pure white highlights to part of the hair which looked a little too grey. There I'm just adding a bit of elf flesh to those claw-like hands because I forgot them during the highlight stage earlier, but just pick out how bony they look really. Focus on the knobbly knuckles. To paint the pupils in the eyes, we slow things right down to normal speed. This is real time I'm painting this in. It's just a simple matter of getting a tiny tip of black on a very fine detail brush, and take time and care to line the eyes up before you poke the eye with the brush. So you line them up and then bam, pupils dotted. Staying with that black and returning to 8 times speed, here's me painting the obsidian staff Saruman carries. It does take some time and care just to get it perfect and try and avoid black on that carefully pale cloak. The only real addition I add to add some variety is gold with Retributor Armour on his kind of sash-like belt thing. I don't really know what it is, but I don't really know what colour it's meant to be either, but it feels like the head of the White Council should have a little bit of bling. So I paint that in gold, and it's less obvious in this version of Saruman than in others though, so he's opened his cloak up and all that sort of stuff, so I paint that gold. I also dab in a bit of Codex Grey onto the little scarfy thing that's dangling underneath there as well. Again, more prominent in other versions of the miniature. With more white, I just pootle around the mini, tidying up any edges, dry brushing the ends of that scarfy thing, and generally lightening everything up that I think looks a little too dark, too bony, or a little bit too brown. So then I base it with a gravelly scheme as if he's wandering through Isengard inspecting his orcs and Uruk-hai, and also to fit the theme of my Uruk-hai army. It's up to you what you do. But then I also finish off with a dab of Reikland Fleshshade on the gold belt, just to add a little bit of darkness at the recesses there. Then voila! The leader of the White Council, Saruman the White, in all his malevolent glory. As I mentioned earlier, this was a Patreon request from one of my main and earliest supporters on the platform, so thanks Benny. And if you want to join Benny and others on there and support me and request for more content on the channel, what kind of stuff you'd like me to make for you next, then head over to patreon.com/battlegames in Middle-earth. The link is in the description below. You can also see the other Saramans I've painted here, and I'd say it's on par with my previous effort, which I painted over a black base coat, then Gorthor Brown all over, and then highlighting in the same way as in this video. I think I'm a bit more comfortable painting over the black, but I hope this method works for you too. I'm just intrigued, which do you prefer, painting white over black or shading it from a white base coat? I'm really intrigued at what you think is the best way of doing it. Do answer in the comments below. And thanks for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to check out my other videos and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, ta-ra!